Welcome everyone to the very first TP Talks session. Today we're talking about securing the remote workforce. As a reminder, it is CPD accredited, so it will count towards your points if you collect CPD points. If you don't, you can register for the points. We'll send out the details of how to do that after the session. We're joined today by Russell McDermott from Netwrix. Hi, Russell. Thank you for joining us today.
Hi there. Good morning, everyone.
A quick agenda for today. We'll run through some housekeeping to make sure the rest of the session runs smoothly. I know we've had a bit of a bumpy start there. We'll go through the key learnings, what we're gonna cover, and we'll pass over to Russell, who'll talk about securing the remote workforce. There will then be an opportunity for a Q&A, and then we'll do a quick wrap up. So some housekeeping. You will be muted throughout the session. If you have any pressing questions, use the raise my hand feature, which you should be able to see on the left-hand side of the screen. Any questions you've got, use the comment box, and we'll get to those at the end of the session. We will record and share the slides after the end of today's session, and we will send those around for you so you can watch it back and share it at your leisure. So a few key learnings of why we've put on the session today. So obviously with all the changing situations with the global coronavirus pandemic, I know we're all bored of hearing about it. What are the key challenges of protecting a remote workforce? I think remote working is something that's likely to be here to stay for longer than just the duration of the pandemic. So how can we protect our remote workforce from insider threats, outsider threats? What are the best practices for preventing things like data leakages? And how can we identify the various security threats which stem from remote working? And then added to that, we'll talk about how to maintain a productive remote workforce. How can we thrive when we're working remotely rather than just survive? How can we actually get a benefit from it? Here's just a few quick stats as to why remote working is important. So at the height of the lockdown, the first lockdown that is in the UK, 60% of the UK workforce were working remotely. Adding to that, 26% are planning to work from home permanently, I think based on the benefits that they've seen from working remotely, which they were kind of forced into. And another sort of more personal benefit is that the average person from working remotely has actually saved themselves £44.78, which is not an insignificant amount of money. Obviously, with economic times being fairly tough, I think it's something to consider as a key benefit of working remotely that people have seen. And then that brings us on to the main bulk of the session. So I'll pass over to Russell now, who will talk through and use his expertise to talk about the key challenges of securing a remote workforce. So over to you, Russell.
Okay, yeah, thanks a lot for that, Johnny. Also going to take a look at some of the key challenges, and what are some of those challenges that organisations are obviously facing around this kind of issue. So since the pandemic, the emergency need to start working from home has certainly changed everything. We switched from probably 70% of office workers to around 200% of remote workers from home, which happened over the course of a week or two. And this was certainly a global issue. And at Netwrix here, we have roughly around 400 employees worldwide. So you can tell that this was also a challenging time for the organisation as well, having to do that transitioning. And a lot of customers that we have talked with were also pointing out certainly the same challenges that we have seen ourselves. At this time of rapid change, the most important thing is to keep the organisation up and running and to keep the employees productive. And there were just too many changes at once. However, one of those changes is that employees are running into issues. Help desk support calls certainly gone through the roof in many cases because people have to deal with tools or applications they don't know, maybe they're not familiar with. And it can be a distraction, and sometimes employees are just trying to be productive. They're not sure whether they will be able to access certain systems or certain files, so they then potentially download local copies. They could then do things that may potentially create a risk for your organization. And IT budgets are being reprioritized as well. a lot of projects have been put on hold because of an all-hands-on-deck approach. Everyone has to be very focused on helping the organization just to continue to be productive. And companies have to spend on new equipment or new services. An example being, having to purchase additional laptops for users that were then previously working on desktop computers. So they can then make that transition to work from home. And companies have to invest in communication tools, conferencing tools. In many cases, it's probably already in place to some extent. However, use of these tools has certainly increased. So priorities and budgets are definitely changing. Projects are being reviewed, put on hold. And we have to deal with those changes. And then finally, not everyone is happy about the changes taking place. And we have to face that reality as well. The economy is slowing down. Companies are scrutinizing their spending. So someone could become unhappy because they can no longer work on something they consider maybe fun or important. So the organization is then changing their priorities now. Some companies have even had to reduce the working hours or do other things to save on costs. And people may get unhappy. Unfortunately, people who do become unhappy because of these changes, or perhaps an existing disgruntled employee who may already be unhappy, they now have this sense of less monitoring, less control by the employer when they are then working from home. So some of them will, unfortunately, may think that this is a good time to maybe take a chance or do something that they can then use to their own advantage. And again, we have to deal with those scenarios as well. We've got to protect our organizations from those kind of attacks. So first of all, talking about some of the productivity and measures that companies are, talking to get everyone to work remotely, or taking to get everyone to work remotely. Sorry. We as the IT organization certainly have the responsibility to not only enable users to work, but to make sure that part of that conversation is how we enable them to work securely. Where are the risks? How can we prevent them? How can we help the users stay productive and stay safe and secure at the same time? Definitely consider using productivity apps, cloud apps, communication apps. Make sure that users understand what is available to them, when the data is available to them, so that they feel safe, they feel secure, and they don't feel like they have to keep a local copy of everything on their own laptop or desktop or home computer. Because that has the potential to become a liability if users just start keeping a copy of everything on their local devices. So you have to make sure you give them the access to the data they need. And consider maybe switching to new tools to potentially do that. As for the resources and assets that you cannot move to the cloud, you will have to enable things like VPN to make that, again, look at making that secure. So again, help employees understand how to use a VPN connection. Make sure you monitor this kind of VPN access, because obviously that will then make it potentially the first line of defense for you in many cases. And then finally, the endpoints are ultimately becoming part of your internal network now. Certainly the conversations about securing the perimeter is ages old, but the perimeter is definitely dissolving. So there is much more stuff that you have to care about. With all these endpoints and various laptops and home computers joining your network through a VPN connection, you have to take care of them as well. Make sure you patch those endpoints and update your patch schedules for the equipment that you can't control. Consider potential access controls to restrict all the non-supported, non-secure operating systems for the devices that you don't have much control over. But also train your employees to update their home computers if that's what they are using. This is important. This is preventing certainly a lot of bad stuff from happening, as we all very well know. But on the project budget and prioritization, look at what you already have. In many cases, organizations already have some sort of policies or some sort of approach to securing your remote workers. Whether it's one employee or a certain percentage of employees, you most likely already have someone within the organization who has been working remotely before this all started. So review what you've been doing and find a way to scale it. You most likely already have your remote work policies, maybe not formal, maybe not written down, but check what you have and talk to your colleagues. Find out what you've done in the past to secure your remote workers. Even if you did not formalize it, you most likely did something at the end of the day. So definitely, again, review those policies, what you've been doing so far, and make sure that you propagate that experience, propagate that knowledge, and update it to this new reality. You most likely already have tools and controls to ensure the least privilege access principle. Again, take a look at where you have been applying this, and take a look at any new tools that you are starting to use, and maybe you have to extend those policies again to these new systems and applications. But again, most likely this has already been in place, so you just need to expand on it and not necessarily reinvent the wheel. And another example would be your access policies. Do you already have things like single sign-on in place? Do you have multi-factor authentication methods? Again, review them, see where it makes sense to expand that within your environment. And now that people are accessing systems, applications, and data from home or other locations, but not from the office, maybe you need to reestablish your password policies. Maybe you need to make those a little bit more stricter. So again, definitely review them. You've probably already done this, but have those controls and tools in place. You just need to make sure that you apply them again within this new reality that we are all in.
It's worth saying there, when it comes to password policies, we recommend saying don't have beef stew as a password because it's not strong enough. Everyone's on mute there, but I'm assuming you're all laughing in tears.
This brings us on to things like disgruntled employees. Funny onto the bad apples. It is very easy. You just need to detect and respond. So you cannot have technical measures to prevent it. Unfortunately, you have to give your trust to your co-workers and your employees. But you need to trust and verify. So make sure that you've got the tools and processes in place to keep an eye on what's happening and to be aware of what's happening, especially around your most sensitive data and most sensitive assets. Survey results, stories in the media, and growth in the market for enterprise threat management platforms all certainly suggest a consensus of opinion that the insider threat is both real and urgent. The first step is to understand the roots of the insider threat problem. And there are normally three key factors at play. There's the technological factor, the human factor, and the organizational factor. So one reason insider threats are increasing is that people have the means. Simply put, technological advances create many avenues for attacks on businesses. In particular, computing resources are increasingly powerful and available. The workforce is becoming more mobile, and smart devices are proliferating. Social communication channels and internet use in general continue to increase. And all of these technological trends contribute to the growing complexity and ubiquity of computer threats. A second important factor at play is human nature. Insiders are becoming attackers or the unwitting tools of attackers. Certainly for a variety of reasons. Human beings tend to neglect training and ignore established information sharing protocols and data protection procedures, especially those that may seem arbitrary or inconvenient. So they do things like write their passwords down, leave their workstations unattended, share information impudently, and then insert potentially infected flash drives into company workstations. Any of which of these is certainly a clear security threat. At the end of the day as well, people make errors, such as misconfiguring systems or access permissions. These can then result in information security breaches and intellectual property theft. But other people, they are actively malicious. They may be motivated by ideology, personal convictions, unresolved ambitions, greed, thrill-seeking, or real or imagined grievances. They could be living in difficult conditions, be susceptible to bad influences from the outside, out of financial need. And people have varying levels of acceptance of responsibility. Maybe some people will confess to or even boast about their wrongdoing, while others will then camouflage their destructive ability as best as they can, making them harder to catch. But it's important to keep in mind the notion insider. It's not only includes company staff, but anyone inside your defined enterprise network security perimeter, such as contractors, suppliers, business partners, or even resellers. And third, organizations often fail to protect themselves to the full extent possible. Any of the following can then push insiders to counterproductive behavior and increase your risk of an inside attack. Things like easily or escalated access to sensitive information to those who do not need it to perform their business roles, and insufficient oversight of privileged users. Lack of a comprehensive network security policy regarding access to non-public information through remote connections by employees working from home or who access to unauthorized networks. Improper, unclear, or missing labeling of proprietary or sensitive data. Inadequate training, or the perception that internal IT security is not sufficiently strict. For example, complying with the requirements is not obligatory, and that failure to comply will not have any real serious consequences. And intense working conditions that keep people from having time to think about their actions from a security perspective. So, combating insider threats, it is a complex undertaking that does not rest solely on the IT shoulders. However, what IT pros can do is to mitigate the risk of system compromise and intellectual property violations with the help of technologies and tools that enable proper alerting, analysis, and reporting. These tools can help you ensure that no trusted employee, partner, or contractor gets away with damaging your company. So you can then build a comprehensive insider threat management program that then facilitates detection, investigation, and prevention of unauthorized insider activity. So work with your business to identify what's important, maybe review what are the additional controls you can then put in place around that. Do make sure that you have a response plan, and not just on the technical side as well, not just the recovery itself. I'm pretty sure all of you, do have backups and you regularly test them. You may already have the insider response plans, but again, that's certainly all great. But make sure whatever you do is that you review your response plan from the communication perspective, because when everyone is remote, if your systems are not available, if there is an incident involving any kind of fraudulent access to communication systems, or if the important accounts are compromised, you need to make sure that you've got the communication in line and everyone understands who needs to be notified and how, what communication methods you can use, and what electronic communication methods you may have as well. So definitely review your response plan from that perspective, and then make sure that it's up to date. So just going to stop here for a quick poll. Is remote working part of your organization's long-term plan?
What I'm saying here, the poll should be on the left-hand side of your screen. So if you look on to the left-hand side, you should be able to respond to that question that Russell's just mentioned there. So is remote working part of your long-term plan beyond the current coronavirus or pandemic situation? We've also had a question come through, so I'm just going to jump to that one quickly before we progress with the rest of the session. So the question we've had is, you mentioned doing system backups. How often would you recommend doing a system backup? And is that more frequent with working remotely as opposed to working in an office, or is it about the same?
Well, I'd say certainly the average mid-sized company will certainly benefit from performing a full backup every 24 hours with an incremental backup, say every 6 hours as well. However, businesses such as maybe a mid-size online retailers may want to increase their incremental backups to maybe 4 hours in addition to producing things like transactional logs on an hourly basis as well. Transactional logs are then those files which list any changes within your database. And as always with backups, move backup media to a secure location, fireproof safe or cabinet. Certainly keeping a copy of offsite as well. Certainly take those on a regular basis.
Fantastic, thanks, Russell.
No problems. I'll assume we'll come to the poll towards the end of the session, but let's move on with the presentation. So also take a look now at some of the best practices for preventing a data leakage. So there is a lot of malicious activity out there to certainly be aware of, and we'll try to talk about what and how we as security professionals and IT departments can do to help with that. There are a lot of different factors of attacks. And based on what we see and what we hear in the market, from conversations with our clients, is there are three major vectors for attacks. There are attackers out there trying to look for any exposed external access and entry points into your environment. Companies looking to keep their users productive are opening up protocols like remote desktop connectivity to their intranet or extend VPN access on things like that. Attackers are trying to find ways to certainly store credentials into your VPN connection points, or trying to identify any vulnerable RDP connection points that is open to the internet. But there is definitely a lot of activity you've probably heard of in the last few months about some vulnerabilities found in some VPN and firewall devices from different vendors. There are attackers out there trying to leverage these vulnerabilities. So if you have not patched your firewalls, if you have any network equipment that could be vulnerable, please go and check it and certainly patch them. It's also important to understand and work back to back with your business stakeholders on what kind of access different users need, to which systems they need that access, and how you can make that secure. How you can enable that access without compromising too much, and what additional controls you have to put in place to certainly compensate for that. For example, if you need to provide access to your internal systems, certainly please use VPN access instead of opening up RDP to the internet. Certainly RDP is not really the most secure way. If you are providing access to your internal systems, which are critical or valuable to your business, make sure that you review your access policies. Maybe you need to set up stronger password policies. Maybe you need to enable multi-factor authentication. And yes, that may have impacts on the usability, but you need to make sure that you certainly find a balance there. So talk to your stakeholders and see how you can compensate for that. Maybe you already have some tools in place and you just need to expand on the coverage of those tools. And in many cases, it is possible, and I definitely encourage you to work with the business to make sure that you revoke any unnecessary access. As your risk rises because of opening up VPN remote access to your network, you may want to then decrease the impact of any compromised accounts. And the risk calculations are always dependent on the likelihood of the risk happening and the impact and the cost of the risk. If the likelihood is increasing, look at what you can do to decrease the impact. Revoking any unnecessary access, changing full control to read-only access where you can, will definitely help you to reduce that risk. Finally, take backups. It's all about availability, business continuity these days. So make sure you have those backups both online and offline. Make sure that you've practiced the recovery process, and make sure that you go through these changes so you have people who know what they need to do to restore backups, that they and they've actually practiced that as well. But one thing I probably did not talk about, and the biggest attack vector today, is certainly the users. Employees are definitely confused by a lot of changes, both by the technology that they have to use as they move from the familiar office environment to home, but also the overall situation happening outside of their homes. There is confusion, people are feeling insecure, And unfortunately, attackers are playing this card. Unfortunately, there will be spoofing emails pretending to be your HR department, sending information about maybe how to get your coronavirus test, for example. And there will be links to web forms asking you to leave your personal information. Or there will be an attachment encouraging to run a virus or malware. This is certainly what we have seen, and this is what is happening. And again, there will be people trying to take advantage of this situation. So you need to share your empathy with your users, to work with them, give them guidance and assurance that you're on their side and that you're here to help. But they also need to do their part as well. And there are things that we can then do. Always verify the sender of an email, for example. If something is happening outside of the normal, find another way to double check. If you get an unusual email from your HR department or superior, talk to the same person over a chat, or maybe confirm with them over the phone first that they actually did send that. Most of all, be vigilant. Make sure that you don't open all of the attachments and think before you click. All of the usual stuff you've been telling your users, but you need to reiterate this in this new reality. Don't yell at them, don't demand them to obey, but share your empathy, understand that they are confused, understand that they need your help, and provide that help. But it's also fair for you to ask for their help in return as well. So that's pretty much it really on best practices, to be honest. So just really want to open it up to any questions, and I guess we'll review that poll as well that we had.
Yeah, we will. Thanks a lot, Russell, for that. That's great. We have had a couple more questions come through, so we'll get to those just now. So how do the remote working security challenge differ if you're using a bring your own device policy? Is it more difficult? Is there anything different if a BYOD policy is in place within an organization?
Yes, I mean, certainly around bringing your own devices, there's certainly a lot of factors to think about there. Certainly 7 that come to mind for myself. Many organizations, BYOD is a decision that's made for many reasons that have nothing really to do with security. And if you're at the helm of a program that allows or is considering allowing employees to use personal devices for work, you're probably certainly concerned about the security risks. There's things like data leakage to be concerned about. Data can be lost or exposed when devices are misplaced or stolen, or if a personally owned device has malware on it. Things like sketchy apps. Not all personal apps are what they appear to be, or have any business need being on your users' mobile devices. In some cases, malicious apps have the potential to take control over a user's mobile device. And this could certainly result in things like surveillance, unexpected data calls, or charges, or loss of personal work information. There's certainly a lack of management. With any mobile device, employee or company owns, there are risks associated with a loss of control. When an endpoint walks out of your company's building, it can certainly be difficult to control whether it's used in on a questionable free wireless connection, or whether it could be misplaced or stolen. Things like device infection. The vast majority of users with an infected smartphone don't know their device is carrying any malware. And with any BYOD program, IT pros should ensure that mobile OSs are also kept up to date as well. Poor policies. It may be possible to attempt a BYOD program without effective security policies in place, but it's certainly risky. If your organization requires to comply with things like PCI DSS, HIPAA, GDPR, or maybe any other regulatory requirements, an effective policy is necessary to avoid any fines. Mixing things like personal use and business use. BYOD, mixing business use and personal use is certainly inevitable. You can't control whether your employees decide to shop online at a compromised website, or whether they will misplace a device. And lastly, that inability to control devices as well. Many BYOD programs, the majority of security stress comes from a lack of control around devices. Employees are not always careful, and disgruntled staff can certainly do a lot of damage with too much access as well.
That's great. Thanks, Russell. And just going to the second question that we've had through, it goes back to what we talked about in password policies. How often, in your experience, would you recommend people telling their employees to reset their passwords or update their passwords?
Good question. I mean, certainly, updating passwords on a regular basis. I guess each company is probably going to be a little bit different on how they want to provide their policies, but certainly maybe on a monthly basis to have your policies changed. Certainly, ensure that you're enforcing strict passwords as well, where they have to use a mixture of characters, uppercase, lowercase, numbers, maybe even special characters as well. Enforce things like remembered passwords, so they cannot continuously use the same password over and over again.
Okay, fantastic. That's actually all the questions that we've had through. But it's worth saying the contact details are there. If anyone has any questions after the session that comes to mind, feel free to reach out. We've got email address there, phone number. We're always happy to help. And thank you, Russell.
No problems. You're more than welcome. Thank you very much, everyone.
It's just worth saying that this will be a series of sessions. Obviously, the first one today we've covered securing the remote workforce. But as things change, security threats change, trends, we will be covering different topics that are relevant. So look out for more information. Follow us on LinkedIn, on Twitter for more details. And thank you everyone for joining today.